Absolam and Achitophel by John Dryden. Where was John Dryden born? Northamptonshire. When was John Dryden born? 1631. Where did Dryden study as a king's scholar? Westminster. What was Dryden trained in at Westminster? Classics and rhetoric. In which year did Dryden publish his first poem? 1649. Which college did Dryden attend? Trinity College. When did Dryden obtain his BA degree? 1654. Who was Oliver Cromwell's Secretary of State when Dryden worked for him? John Thurlow. Which important poem did Dryden write in 1659? Heroic Stanzas. Who was the subject of heroic stanzas? Oliver Cromwell. Which poem did Dryden write in 1660 for King Charles II? Astraea Redux. Who criticized Dryden's shifting politics waves? Samuel Johnson. Which year was Dryden proposed for the Royal Society? 1662. Who was Dryden's wife? Lady Elizabeth Howard. In which year did Dryden become poet laureate? 1668. Who was the first official poet laureate of England? John Dryden. Which king dismissed Dryden from the laureateship? King William III. What was Dryden's first play? The Wild Gallant. Which of Dryden's plays was written in blank verse? All for Love. Where did Dryden move during the plague? Wiltshire. Which of Dryden's work is a satirical attacks on Thomas Shadwell? Max Flexnoy. Which poetic form did Dryden standardize? Heroic couplet. Where was Dryden first buried? St. Anne's Cemetery in Soho. Dryden was later reburied in Westminster Abbey near Dash grave, Chaucer's grave. In which year was Dryden reburied in Westminster Abbey? 1710. Where in Westminster Abbey is Dryden commemorated? Poets' Corner. When was Absolam and Achitophel written? 1681. In which city was Absolam and Achitophel written? London. During which literary period was Absolam and Achitophel written? Restoration period. What is genre of Absolam and Achitophel? Satire. Where is Absolam and Achitophel set? Israel. Who is the ruling king in the poem setting? King David. What is the narration style of Absolam and Achitophel? Omniscient. What is the rhyme scheme of the poem Absolam and Achitophel? AABB. In which meter is the poem written? Iambic pentameter. How many metrical feet are in each line? 5. What is the poetic form used in the poem? Heroic couplet. Who pioneered the use of the heroic couplet? Geoffrey Chaucer. Which poet is credited with perfecting the heroic couplet? John Dryden. Which 18th century poet further refined the heroic couplet? Alexander Pope. In which century did Dryden perfect the heroic couplet? 17th. What poetic form is used in Absolam and Achitophel? Heroic couplet. Which political crisis does the poem address? Exclusion. Who was the main opponent of King James, Duke of York? Anthony Ashley Cooper. Who was the King Charles II illegitimate Protestant son? James Scott. James Scott, later known as the dash first Duke of Monmouth. Which biblical book inspired Absalom and Achitophel? Samuel. Who does Absalom represent in the poem? James Scott. Who does Achitophel represent in the poem? Anthony Ashley Cooper. Anthony Ashley Cooper, known as the dash first Earl of Shaftesbury. Who does King David represent in the poem? Charles II. What was the religious affiliation of James, Duke of York? Roman Catholicism. Who composed most of the second part of Absolam and Achitophel? Nahum Tate. Which literary rival of Dryden was targeted in the second part? Thomas Shadwell. In which year was the second part of the poem published? 1682. Who is the protagonist of the poem Absolam and Achitophel? Absalom. Who is the antagonist of the poem Absolam and Achitophel? Achitophel. Who is Absalom's father in the poem Absolam and Achitophel? David. Who is the third king of Israel in the poem Absalom and Achitophel? David. Who is the first king of Israel in the poem Absalom and Achitophel? Saul. Who is the heir presumptive of Israel in the poem Absalom and Achitophel? David's brother. Who is the most important of Achitophel's men? Korah. Who hatches the plot to discredit David's brother? Korah. Who is the most powerful of Achitophel's men? Shimei. Who is described as a buffoon by Dryden? Zimri. Who is the leader of Egypt in the poem? Pharaoh. Who was Saul's son and briefly king of Israel? Ishbosheth. Who has the ability to manipulate laws? Jonas. Who is David's oldest and most trusted friend? Barzillai. Who accompanied David during his exile? Barzillai. Who is the eldest son of Barzillai? Thomas Butler. Who is an important member of the Sanhedrin? Amiel. Who is the Sagan of Jerusalem? A priest. What is the epigraph of Absalom and Achitophel? Essai proprius stes T capiat magis. Who does the poet refuse to apologize to? Opposition. Which religious group does the poet find well in? Protestantism and Catholicism. Which biblical book does the poet reference for curses? Deuteronomy. What should a good poem do according to the John Dryden? Please the more moderate sort. What does the poet compare poetry to? Medicine. Who does the poet aim to please? Moderates. What does the poet say about aggressive satire? Difficult. What is as hard as condemning according to the poet? Flattering. What does the poet request the reader not to criticize? Anonymity. What does the poet claim affects a reader judgment of the poem? Morals. What does the poet suggest should reconcile Absalom and David? What does the poet say satire aims to correct? Society. What is the unpleasant aspect of satire compared to? Medication. What does the poet consider the poem to be for society remedy? What does the poet claim about the story's ending? Unfinished. How does the poem suggested should not be blamed for discomfort? Poet. Who does the poet believe should learn wisdom and mercy? Absalom. What does the poet consider themselves in relation to history? Observer. What theme in Absolam and Achitophel represent dishonesty in governance, corruption? Which theme relates to the belief that monarchs rule by divine will, divine right? What symbol in the poem represent authority and kingship? Crown. Which theme signifies betrayal and broken trust, loyalty? What symbol represent misguided worship and idolatry, golden calf? What theme highlights the pursuit of dominance and control, ambition? Which symbol in the poem represent the common people, flock of sheep? Which theme deals with act of deception and treachery, betrayal?